So sort of the couple of big stories in the initial battle when the Japanese fight tooth and nail, and this is again what people don't know about is, but this is a street battle. The Japanese have used Meiktila is a westernized city, lots of European colonial style, like European Asian colonial style. Architecture. It's brick buildings. There's concrete, and it's slightly industrial because it's a transport hub of all these different things coming in and out. It's not like a wooden Asian, like ancient Asian city. It's not like that. And lots of pagodas, the big golden and white pagodas and so on. So there's fighting in these places. And there are some really amazing ones. Things like when they're capturing these things, there's a guy called Fazal Din, who's in the 17th Indian Division, an Indian soldier. When they're attacking some Japanese bunkers, one of the particular bunkers, they decide instead of waiting inside their bunker to be killed, for them to come and drop grenades in, they charge out of their bunker before they're killed. And basically his squad of about 6 to 8 men, they have a hand-to-hand fight just outside a bunker that they were attacking. And Fazal Din ends up with the Japanese officer stabbing him, and the report says that the tip of the sword came out of his back, so all the way through. He manages to wrestle the Japanese officer off him, remove the sword, and kill the Japanese officer himself, and then rescues a colleague before then reporting back as a wounded soldier, 5 minutes later. And he does die later that afternoon or the next morning. And he's awarded the Victoria Cross, so that, the British version of the Medal of Honor. And the next day, a guy called William Weston, who's a 21-year-old second lieutenant in the West Yorkshires, so from West Yorkshire in the north of England, they've just finished mopping up, or they think they've finished mopping up an area of bunkers. And interestingly, some Japanese soldiers had tried to swim across a lake. There was a lake in this particular part. And they'd had a bit of a turkey shoot at the guys swimming, and literally like tanks lining up and just machine gunning them as they're going. So, it's a really vicious battle in general. But as this is happening, one of the bunkers they thought was empty, that these guys who were swimming away had come from, had actually just remained quiet. And they start machine gunning the guys from about 50 yards in the back, so pretty much point blank range. And he runs to one of the tanks, who starts to put a bit of machine gun fire down. And he then, with a couple of other guys, heads for the Japanese bunker. And just as he reaches it, he's hit by the machine gun or a rifle or whatever. And he collapses sort of near the door. And he's 21 years old. There was a thing in this country, in Britain, earlier this week, where one of the politicians said, the kids today wouldn't be able, kids today wouldn't be able to, do this sort of thing. And the thing is, it's complete nonsense, because people were saying that back in the 1930s about the guys that then did it in the Second World War. Yeah. They weren't as good as their dads in the First World War. All this stuff. He's 21, he's wounded, and he's fallen, collapsed at the side of this bunker. He takes a grenade from his belt and just rolls into the Japanese bunker and blows it up. And his colleagues, throw a couple of phosphorus grenades in there and drag him out by his feet, and he's already dead, obviously. But he gets a Victoria Cross as well. So real, pretty grim stuff, but, stirring in another way, like that sacrifice for someone so young as well. And also that thing about how young lieutenants, sorry. Just how young they are. There are a couple of other great ones. Miles Smeaton, I've mentioned, he's charging about on his tank. To be honest, he's a proper old school British cavalry officer. I imagine if you're going to think about it, he is the cliche that you think of, tally ho chaps and all this sort of stuff on the back of his tank. And he does treat it like, he talks about the way that the soldiers talked about their experiences, in the moment when the adrenaline's pumping, like excited soldiers at the end of a fox hunt and things like that. But it's not just them as well. There's another guy, a medical orderly, who, this is during the phase where the battle over the airfield really intensifies, because each morning the Japanese basically realise that the airfield is the central part of the British plan here. Cut off the airfield, the British will starve and the Indians will starve. And so What this leads to is the Japanese manage to encroach on the airfield every morning, and then what's called the RAF regiment, which is a bit like infantry for the Royal Air Force, basically. They go out every single morning and push the Japanese off the airfield, because one of the problems is that they don't have enough men to build like a proper front line, which is another reason why Cowan does these armoured sweeps. He can't hold the front line, so he has just 6 defensive boxes dotted around, and he sends all his troops out from there. But that includes the airfield. He can't guard the perimeter of the airfield. He doesn't have enough men. Because if I didn't say this earlier, but I probably should have done. They know they're going to be outnumbered, and it's a weak division, although reinforcements are airlifted in, against 2.5 divisions, but also 15th Army's artillery is added. You mentioned the artillery. They are outnumbered and also outgunned, including larger caliber Japanese guns. And this is what they're using to basically plaster the airfield and infiltrate it. So every single morning, the Japanese have dug in over cover of night, and before any planes can land with supplies and also get the wounded out, because they're using it to get wounded out as well, they're having to go out and clear the airfield. And on one of these occasions, after they've cleared the Japanese off, there are still some Japanese further down that they don't realise are there with an anti-tank gun. And as a C-47 is taxiing to take off, as it reaches the end of the runway, a Japanese anti-tank gun fires straight up the runway. It tears through the engine on the port wing, collapses the undercarriage. The aircraft dips down to its left as the undercarriage collapses. And it's full of wounded because it's unloaded and of supplies and filled with wounded. And one of the guys inside, and the Japanese now start machine gunning the plane as well, but from quite a long distance. It's not close range, but they are being under artillery and machine gun fire. And basically, this medical orderly, he drags all the guys out. There's a Sikh soldier that's like head to foot covered in burns, who's completely wrapped up. He drags him away. He gets this poor guy who. He was wounded in the back and the arm, I think it was, off the top of my head. But the shrapnel that's come through the bodywork or something, the top of his scalp has been ripped open, but he's still alive. And I talk about this in Thunder Run, he heard the conversation where one of the guys was basically like, oh, he's had it. And this medical orderly says, well, no, I don't want his body to burn. So he drags him off anyway. And the guy survives the war and everything with, his head, obviously, like the head wound didn't kill him or anything. Yeah. But obviously one guy said, leave him, he's had it. But he's like, no, I don't want to leave him. I don't want to leave the body, kind of thing. And I suppose that is the not wanting to leave a man behind. And he didn't know that guy. He just felt he couldn't on a moral level. It's not like he's a comrade and felt like he wanted to get him out. He was nobody to him, but he still did it. And it's amazing. He also gets a military medal as well, one of the other medals for bravery. I mean, he could have got more, but, it's not about that really, I guess. But yeah, there are loads of great stories like that though, the armoured sweeps. I was so lucky when I was making this, when I was writing this, a guy who now lives in Portugal, retired to Portugal. He, about 15 years ago, sat down with his dad, and filmed him on a video camera for a couple of hours talking about, he was an artillery observer. So he was driving around in a Sherman tank, observing the artillery. And he's another one who's just having a great time. He described it as, I was charging around, shooting from the hip with my artillery guns, radioing back to get the artillery landing. And he genuinely, he would say, he always used to end sentences in a really particular way in this film footage. And like I said, I've used this in the book. Stuff like he would say, yes, and of course we had to, we're charged across, and then I had to call down this fire on these Japanese, and they all start running, and great fun. Like every single sentence ended like that. He's like such a character, and he's another one. The guys that are in the armor, they appear to have a great time because it's like they're unleashed from all of the responsibilities earlier in the war, and it's not as dangerous as being a tank man in the European theatre.
Certainly not.
100%. It's not, and they're having a great time. But if you're in the infantry, it's horrific because it's hand to hand.